Warmly welcome to Almedalen 2021 and to the series of seminars that the European Commission's representation in Sweden is organizing in this context of this year's digital Almedalen. We are sorry that we cannot meet you all on the beautiful island of Gotland, but it will have to wait until next year. My name is Annika Weppling-Korsenek and I'm the Deputy Head of the European Commission's representation in Sweden. And with our seminars in this context of Almedalen, we wish to show that domestic politics, which is what Almedalen is mainly about, also go hand in hand with EU policy, and these two are interlinked, and it's important to see them in a context together. And this seminar today is clearly an example of this, because we will talk about climate. We will talk about climate neutrality 2050 and what EU climate policy can mean for Sweden. The EU has launched what it calls the Green Deal to kind of to foster this transition, and with the headline target of becoming the first climate neutral continent in 2050. This target has then been followed up with a stepping stone for 2030, or an increased ambition for 2030, with a target of reducing carbon greenhouse gases by at least 55%. And then Sweden has also set its own national target for climate neutrality to be achieved by 2045. So what does EU's climate target mean for Sweden? What would be the role of, we have a big upcoming legislative package that goes under the name Fit for 55 that will actually then guide us to this new, more ambitious 2030 target. How do these different EU policies influence, for example, the industry transition and the industry's possibility to be in the forefront? These and many more questions we will discuss today, and I will not do it alone. I have a very competent panel with me who will inform us and tell us about their views on these issues. I have Mauro Petriccione with me, who is the Director General of DG Climate Policy in the European Commission. I have Johan Kuylenstierna with me, Chair of the Swedish Climate Policy Council, and Nina Ekelund, Secretary General of the Hagainitiativet. And you are all warmly welcome to be part. You are with me on the screen, so you're not unfortunately with me here in the room, but I'm very happy that you are with me, even though in this way. I will start by giving the floor to Mauro Petriccione, who will give us a bit of an introductory statement on EU climate policy and these targets that I talked about, and then we will go into a more of a panel discussion with all of us. So please, Mauro.
Many thanks, Annika, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for the invitation. I think it is a particularly important moment. We are on the verge of presenting all the legislation that we need. This is our proposal for the legislation we need to achieve our climate objectives. So it's a very important time, especially to be able to relate to a Swedish audience, because Sweden has been in the lead for this and has experimented with many of the solutions and many of the ideas that we are trying to develop at the European level. Let me start with a word about the long-term objective, the one you mentioned, climate neutrality 2050. You will have seen in the latest G7, for instance, an emphasis on the Paris Agreement objective of 1.5 degree maximum. Paris Agreement is a bit more generous in that respect, but it's becoming very, very clear. The science is telling us that even 1.5 degrees warmer world is not a very pleasant world to live in, and that we really have to double our efforts to achieve that limitation and not go beyond. And 2050 for Europe is perhaps ambitious, but we think we can do it. It is a strategy which is not only a strategy of climate change, a strategy to stop climate change, but it's an industrial strategy, it's an economic strategy. It's a way to make our economy more modern, more competitive, more resilient to climate change, our society more prosperous, and our society fairer. I think there are opportunities in tackling this crisis, also in addressing some of the problems that we have not been able to solve so far. And it is true that Europe doesn't matter very much when it comes to emissions. And by 2030, we will matter less. But it's not only a matter of doing our job and doing our part. It's a matter of showing a working model. How can a continent create a modern, competitive, prosperous economy and society while eliminating emissions, essentially? Because, yes, our carbon sink is very important. We will need it to compensate a little bit of emission that we cannot eliminate, but we really are talking about eliminating more than 95% of the emission we produce over the next 30 years. And 30 years is at the same time a long time and a very short one. So this is the context under which we were operating. What is the Fit for 55 package that you have mentioned, Annika? Is putting the Green Deal into action, and the Green Deal is our agenda on how we begin this transformation. It's a 30 years transformation. We don't have the illusion that we are able to set out the policy, the solutions, the ideas in detail that we can use over 30 years. But we can do it over 10 years. We've done it, we know we can do it, and we have to do it in a way that puts us on the right path, on the right trajectory. And the other important thing that people need to bear in mind is that last week, the Council of the European Union and the European Parliament approved the European Climate Law. It's what my boss, the Executive Vice President Timmermans, calls the law of laws in this field. It is what gives us the objective, 2050. It gives us the trajectory to get there. And it tells us that being that trajectory, we have to be at 55% reduction in 2030. Makes this mandatory and gives us some parameters on how we have to do it. And then tells us also that we have to care about adaptation to climate change, because even in the best of world, our climate will deteriorate and we will have to adapt and help others to adapt. And it tells us that after 2050, we'll have to start looking at negative emissions, absorbing carbon from the atmosphere in massive quantities if we want to restore our planet to what it ought to be by the end of the century. So the 2030 agenda is essentially an economic agenda. It's how we transform our industry, our power generation, our mobility, how we change the way we manage our lands. We have chosen to base everything around the concept of a carbon market. The emission trading system that the EU has pioneered is one form of carbon pricing. Of course, you can do it differently. You could have carbon taxes. Sweden has a very effective carbon tax, but because you have it, you should know how difficult it is to use these instruments, and not everybody is capable of doing it. The carbon market is more automatic, is more flexible. It allows business to participate in the objective and put their money where it is most effective. So this remains the backbone of our system. We're going to strengthen it, and we're going to experiment with using carbon pricing for other sectors like road transport and the heating and cooling of buildings. Now, I have to stress this because this is going to be a difficult area. First of all, we're not going to bring these sectors into the emission trading. We don't know how the prices are going to arise in the sector. We want to keep it separate. We want to keep it contained. We want to have the instruments to make sure that the prices don't shoot up, because these are sectors where the prices go and hit directly the consumer, the household, the individuals. For power generation and for industry, the effect is there, but it's more mediated by big entities who can manage it better. So we need to have the right instruments to manage it. At the same time, even in a country like Sweden, who has had effective instruments to deal with emissions from transport, emissions continue to grow. And you can imagine how bad the situation is with other countries who don't have the same instrument that Sweden has. So we need to do something drastic for emissions in these sectors. But we also have to make sure that the social impacts are managed. The risk of energy poverty or for households is already existing. Already today, 37 million Europeans struggle with paying their energy bills. We can't afford to see that worse. And in fact, we will propose to devote important resources to handling this problem. And in fact, to go back to the original problem of energy poverty and put together national mechanisms supported by European resources to address that problem. We will continue to have an increasing combination of European regulations and national measures. Over the past 10 years, it's been very clear that what has worked has been the interaction between the two. Whenever we had only European instrument or only national measures, I'm not saying the results have not been good, but they've not been entirely satisfactory. Where we have won is where we have put things together. Even for power generation, where the main instrument is the European carbon pricing, but without national policies to encourage investment in renewable energy, the carbon pricing would have just shot up and would have increased energy bills. The reality that today, the cheaper form of energy in Europe is a renewable energy. Of course, we're still paying for investment. We still compare badly with fossil fuels where the investment has been amortized ages ago. But if you look at the operational expenses, we've already made renewables the cheapest form of energy that exists. And that's happened through a combination of national and European investment, national policies on the use of renewables, and against the background of a strong European carbon price. That approach is what we would like to multiply. Keep national targets within a collective European target, intensify our action at the European level. We're going to strengthen, for instance, the regulations on CO2 standards for cars, but at the same time, articulate it better with what member states are doing. And under the current legislation, we now have national energy and climate plans, which have been very difficult to put together for everybody, including for the more advanced countries. But the results are very, very interesting. We have good plans, good measures. Of course, we have a massive challenge of implementing them, but we start on the right footing, and we want to continue that. So you will see in the new proposals an attempt to improve even further this interaction. And we are going to look seriously at what's happening to our carbon sink. We were very proud of it until perhaps 3 years ago. The standard line was that in 10 years, Europe has added the surface of Greece to European forests. Fantastic. Over the past 3 years, the trend has reversed, and our carbon sink has been deteriorating. And this has been experienced by everybody. You know, forest fires in the summer are not only something that happens in the heat of the southern European summer. We've had spontaneous forest fires in Scandinavia, first time in recorded history. One thing that people don't realize that we were able to cope with that through the European solidarity mechanism, but only because the fires did not happen all at the same time. Otherwise, we would not have had enough firefighting equipment in the whole of Europe to manage that situation. So I think we need to work more to improve our carbon sink, manage our forests even better. By and large, forest management in Europe is good. Better in certain parts than in others, and I know how proud Sweden is of its long tradition of this, but climate change is challenging everybody. And I think we have to continue to improve the way we manage our land. We have to go back to the way we manage our agriculture, bring it back to practices which are not only healthier for the agriculture itself, but also more capable of retaining carbon in soil and in the vegetation. So as you see, very wide-ranging. I could go on and I could give you more detail, but it really will have at least a dozen pieces of legislation. The only good news is that very few of these are brand new. Many of them are reforming and improving legislation which we have modified only recently. So it's already modern. It's a massive exercise, but it's a manageable one. And then there are a few interesting additions. We've created a Just Transition Fund. We're now working on a social facility to help with the issue of consumer vulnerability and household vulnerability. So there are some novelties in this package. At the end of the day, we need to wrap this up over the next 2 or 3 years at most if we want to have an impact on 2030. And we need to do it in a way that gives everybody in Europe, our businesses, our citizens, our institutions, a clear framework which tells you some very basic things. A, we have an objective and we're not going to deflect from it. It's our law now, and it's not going to change. 2, we have the time to achieve that objective, but that the next 10 years, we have to put ourselves on the right trajectory to that objective. 3, we are going to make irreversible the fact that we pay for the emissions that we produce. It's not society at large, which usually means the more vulnerable and the public purse, but it's all of us as citizens, as consumers, as producers, who have to pay the price for the carbon that we emit. And that is going to give our businesses the stable, predictable framework that we need to invest in innovation, in technologies, which we have. We have all the technologies that we need. Some of them are not mature for the market, but they are out of the lab. And we will devote important resources to supporting industry from bringing innovation from the lab, from pilot plants into the market and be successful. Annika, as you can see, I could go on forever. It's one of those subjects where either you get passionate or you get out. But I will stop here and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mauro, and for this very broad expose of the climate policies and what we can expect in the upcoming package. Just a brief follow-up question on this. The 2050 target is binding at EU level. And this has been a bit of a discussion in Sweden because there was a wish that this would be binding on each member state to be climate neutral. Because of the fear that this would kind of make the target less binding in a way, or less easy to follow up. Do you have a short comment on that? How do you see that? Is it still hard enough for this target?
Definitely it is, because it's not only that target. If we had simply one big objective 30 years down the road, I can very feel the preoccupation. So, okay, great, we have this objective. Who does it, when and how? We have the who does it, when and how. We have, for a number of sectors, we have the emission trading, which is a common mechanism. And it is becoming tougher and tougher, and it works. The ETS was supposed to reduce, under the current target of minus 40%, was supposed to reduce emissions in these sectors by 43% in 2030. It has already reduced them by 40%. So it's overperforming itself. And for the other sectors, we have a collective target, which is 30% today, and which has to increase to at least 40%. And that is subdivided in national targets. So European regulation, European targets accompany national targets and vice versa. The 55% for everybody, yes, would have been great. the climate neutrality for everybody would have been great. But is it realistic today, if you look at Europe? And the answer is probably not. We have to get there, but we're not there yet. What we need is instruments that make sure that the greater effort that some member states make because they're better able or more willing or both doesn't get wasted. It translates, for instance, in better opportunity for their business because there will be greater opportunities to deploy green technologies in the member states who have more, a more difficult road to go ahead. At some point, the advantages of investing in green technology in a country like Sweden, they're going to peter out because Sweden is very advanced in all that role. But where will be the opportunities? Somewhere else in Europe. I'm not naming names, but we know where the biggest difficulties are. So it is a fair point. It is a point that needs answering, but I do think we have the answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Johan, could you first tell us a little bit of what the Climate Policy Council is and why you exist, since you actually do exist due to the Swedish climate law, and a bit what the task is, but also maybe then also comment a bit on the 2050 climate neutrality target and how you see this also affecting Swedish policies. We have no sound from you.
Now it should work.
Yes, huh? Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annika, and thanks, Mauro, for that expose. I think it summarized very well why it is so important to work both at the national level and at the European level, and that these levels are actually interlinked, both through the emission systems that we have, but also, of course, if we are all moving in the same direction as Europe, we have a much better chance to really reach the targets in 2050. And also, it's better for our economy altogether. So the Swedish Climate Policy Council, we are the formal evaluation mechanism within the climate law. So we evaluate Swedish government policies and draft a report every year where we assess whether Sweden is actually moving fast enough to reach both the targets that we have set for 2030 and 2040, which is actually linked to the non-trading system, and to 2045, all emissions in Sweden where we should have climate neutrality. So based on our assessments, we then also leave recommendations. The focus is national level, but of course we also very much link up to the European level.
Now Johan was frozen.
Emission.
Now you're back. Good.
Has it frozen?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So from my perspective, I think the European decisions to have climate neutrality by 2050 and also setting a much more ambitious target for 2030 is extremely important. Even though your question for us. Did it freeze or froze again?
Yeah. You're a bit...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now again.
Yeah. So, okay, so I keep this quite short then. Having a common system at the European level is absolutely, detrimental or important in order to reach the targets, both for Sweden, but also at the European level. What will be interesting to a certain extent is if these more ambitious targets by 2030, the 55% reduction, will also have an impact on the Swedish national targets. As Mauro said, our biggest challenges today is the transport sector. And according to our assessment, Sweden is not moving fast enough to reach the targets 2030 and 2040. It means that we have to increase our ambitions. But it may also be that because of the new European targets, Sweden will need to increase also the goals or more ambitious goals by 2030. This is, of course, up for negotiation still, but this is something we will follow clearly. So it's
froze again.
Level.
Yeah,
it froze again. So
yeah,
I leave it there.
But
I'm
I think
sorry.
I think we got the gist of it perfectly, and I think what's very interesting here is also to because sometimes Sweden pats itself a lot on the shoulder, being the good guy in the class. But also here, when it comes to transport, for example, we know that there is a big issue and a big problem, and as you said, maybe these EU targets will also lead to the effect that Sweden also has to gear up, especially when it comes to transport. So that will be very interesting to see, I think. Nina, I think you might have a better connection, but we will try with you at least. It would also be interesting to hear you introduce the Hagainitiative, because you here represent a bit of the companies and the industry, and tell us a bit how they see this with climate neutrality, so how the companies that you represent see climate neutrality to 2050. So please, Nina.
Thank you, Annika, and thank you, Mauro, for your excellent expose over the Green Deal and what's happening with the targets in EU. The Hagainitiative, that's a business network, and it's based in Sweden, and our vision is a profitable business sector without climate impact. And we also have a 1.5 degree strategy, and maybe we have to revise it as well. So we have targets saying that we should have net zero emissions by 2030. That means 85% reduction with our emissions. And we already reduced our emission until 2020. We had a 40% target, and we reduced it more than 40%, 80% and so. So setting targets is important. And just seeing that, looking at climate neutrality, we are very positive to the target, and thank you for agreeing on that in the trialogue. And we also see that we also suggested that we should have a 60% reduction target until 2030. So that was a suggestion from us. And we also wanted to see a binding climate budget instead of an indicative, because we see that is giving more of a clear policy to business to know what will happen. It's both long-term and it's predictable. And we can also see, we looked in our last report, Climate Action, Even More Profitable, and we interviewed 100 companies in Sweden. And the companies responded that EU policy is much more important for them than Swedish policy. And that is why it's so important that EU is aligning its climate policy in all areas, and also aiming to be aligned with the 1.5 degree target. And when EU now have a target to 2030 and also adjust other directives to the target that is more ambitious than the Swedish climate policy, I would say. We don't have a target to 2030 except for traffic, and we still have a long way to go to adjust our other Swedish policy to our national target. So right now you are in the front line.
Thank you, Nina. I think it's interesting to I mean, in a way, at least in Sweden here, when you follow the debate, you often have the feeling that actually it's the industry that is in the forefront, or the companies that are in the forefront, and the politics is following. Of course, we like to see us in another way, at least us working for the European Union. We want to be in the forefront. But if you see hybrid, which is hybrid that's now doing a big, have come very far to do carbon-free steel. You see the big flagship project with Northvolt producing batteries to facilitate electrification, and you also hear them complaining. Yes, we are doing this, but you know, we are almost working against politics. Is this something that you feel, Nina, that, I mean, you also mentioned that actually you wanted, your companies wanted to move further than what was agreed. Do you recognize this, what I'm saying?
Yes, and the problem is often the policy, because if policy could move as fast as the companies want and have strategies for, it would be easier. So I would say that having this climate neutrality, that is, it's in EU, it's crucial for industrial transition, and we're dependent on the climate budget, the EU ETS, the targets, and other policies. So I think the industry have now been given the tools from EU, and that we thank you for. And now we need also to see the Swedish policy to follow. And I think it creates what business really need and industry really needs now. It's long-term signals, it's predictable, and it gives the possibilities for green investments. I have some other things we do need to see, and maybe we come back to that. But this is a good start.
Perfect, thank you. Mauro, this is now a rather positive view from the Swedish industry. Do you recognize this from other countries, or do you get other signals from other countries when it comes to industry's feeling towards climate policy?
Yes and no, in a way, because everybody is satisfied with having a very clear framework and a long-term perspective. You can't really do business without that. And that applies to everybody. Does the national framework always follow? I was interested in hearing the Swedish angle of the debate. You don't hear often about that. I hear many other national debates on the relation between industry and politics, and I still suspect that it's a bit easier in Sweden than in some other places. But okay, that follows. You know, it is a process, and there are constraints which some countries, Sweden is one of them, have managed better than others. If you mentioned hybrid, take the steel industry, which I know very well because I come from a steel town. There are member states where the steel industry has not only modernized, not only renewed itself, which the entire European industry has done, but has been better able to withstand crises like the overcapacity in China. There you have more resources, more energy, more willingness to really innovate. It's a lot more difficult to innovate where you're struggling with unemployment, where your factories are closing under your feet. But at the same time, it's equally necessary. What Sweden is doing with hybrid is what should happen in my country, in my hometown, which is the seat of the worst environmental disaster of industrial Europe of the past decades. And the only way to save a town from mass unemployment is to move a steel plant across the technology to the kind of technology that Sweden is pioneering. Can we do that? I think we have the ability and the resources to do that, but it's not obvious to put it together. So things are, every member state has its own complications, but generally speaking, the direction of travel is one that every member state feels sufficiently comfortable with. Otherwise, I can assure you, we would not have had unanimous consensus of our member states leaders on both the long-term and the short-term objective. They were both very, very difficult discussions. But the other thing I think we can be proud of in Europe is that those discussions have been preceded by a true democratic debate. There has been a huge discussion in all member states, both about the climate neutrality objective and about the 55 objective. And if their governments have come to the European Council and said yes, with all the precautions, the footnotes, all the adjustment that they have sought, but they said yes. And they've said yes because they think they can carry the country with them. So I think we can be satisfied, we can be proud of ourselves. Now, there's nothing wrong with patting ourselves on the back for what we have done, provided it doesn't make us forget that what we have done is only part of the job, and now we have the rest. From that, I just want to make 2 points in reaction to Johan and Nina. On national targets in Sweden, look, that's a Swedish choice. We will propose a higher national target than the current one in European framework. The Sweden want to go beyond that. It's a national choice. But again, we are going to try to do our best to put forward proposals that make things possible. Take an example of road transport. This is not a one-off. This is moving CO2 standards further than they are today. And today's standard has already tripled the number of electric cars on European roads in times of crisis. We're going to make those stricter, faster. There is massive money available for the intra-European network of refueling and recharging, because there's not much point in having good national networks if, especially from smaller countries, where people are used to travel abroad, they don't have the same treatment outside the country. And that money is there, it's been allocated, we are ready to invest. And the carbon pricing that we are thinking of proposing would help consumers switch, but then we need policy, we need an industrial policy that, together with the CO2 standards, persuades the manufacturers to invest more in making electric cars cheaper and more available. And this is happening. And it's happening because we have a combination of actions together. If you focus on one instrument, whether it's national or European, at best, your results are suboptimal. At worst, you may fail. On the 1.5 degrees, I think we can say very loudly that the 55% package is fully aligned on 1.5. We have deliberately set aside the below 2 degrees. If we see, Europe is already at above 1.5 on average of global warming. And we see things getting worse. So for us, 1.5 is the objective of European policy. Not all member states are entirely persuaded, but precisely because they know that on their own, they will not be able to get there. They are taking a risk on the basis of the support they get from the European level. And I think that's very important. The collective action not only backs domestic action for the countries who have the ability to take them, but offers a safety net to those who otherwise wouldn't take the risk.
Thank you. Nina mentioned that there were issues that were maybe not that positive from the industry side that you would like to raise. So I think maybe we should slowly move over to the not so positive side, or let's say the improvement possibilities that industry and companies see on the EU policies. Nina?
Just a short comment on Mauro, what he said. I can see the problems in Sweden and the Nordics. We had this carbon tax since 1990. And of course, that have changed our industrial structure and our way of doing things. And that's also why Finland and Juni Keronen from CLC and I took the initiative when we were in Katowice at the climate meeting, just to get all the business networks working with climate to meet. So every month we meet, and recently we got Romania to join us, and in 2 weeks I'm going to talk at Slovenia at their business network. So we try to give what we have learned during these 10 years when we have been around to help each other, and that's what we do in this European network. I just want to give that as a perspective, because we do see that it is different, and it's really first on the 55 targets. in my opinion, it's not enough, and that's why we just suggested 60%, and we're running out of time. So, and I also want to say, we do need a price on carbon, and from Finland and Norway and the networks, and here in Sweden, we have this call on carbon. I think you heard about it, Mauro. And we want to see effective, robust, reliable, fit-for-purpose carbon pricing instruments like the carbon price, like the EU ETS, like carbon hubs, etc. And we think that is so important. And that's why we got such a big support from business to say that to the national governments that we need this, and we want it ahead of the COP meeting. So a carbon, not a carbon price, but carbon pricing mechanisms is very important. And only of all the emissions, only 22% have a price, and only 5% of them is an effective price. So we need to step up here.
Johan, would you like to comment?
Well, I think what Nina is stressing is extremely important. And again, it demonstrates how important it is also from a business perspective that these are European level policies, that we have that we have a system that is fair across Europe. But she also, I think, demonstrate how important it is that business is now driving the agenda. I didn't fully agree with you, Annika, when you say that sort of, politics is trying to catch up. We have a very different dynamics in the last 5 years. Nina is representing that. And business and politics is adapting to that dynamics. It is a clear fact, of course, that industry today is taking much more initiative and see the transition as a very positive transition. But of course, policies and politics, just like Mauro is explaining, is much more complicated. It also needs to understand the different dynamics in Europe, the different levels of development in Europe, the different challenges that different parts of Europe also has. So the role of I would say, the role of politics and policy is much more supporting the drive that business shows today. And I think this is extremely important. And again, why what Nina is presenting is a good example of that. And it would be interesting to hear what Mauro is saying. And since this is just probably the final opportunity, I think a couple of things that we also need to be very clear about moving ahead is we have also quite different views on certain of solutions at the European level. Biomass and bioenergy is one such example that we will need to discuss much more and also find political agreement on how to deal with this very complex issue. We have the whole issue of strategic resources, such as minerals, which are essential for the transition and where we really need to work at the European level, also looking at trade systems, for instance. And I know that the EU is, of course, also very much concerned about this. And also, I would argue we have to discuss much more, not just common carbon price systems, but also other systems. We have the energy union that we discussed a few years back. These kind of European systems that could support the transition, also in terms of transport infrastructure and energy systems, which we need to discuss much more also how we can collaborate. And if we can collaborate in such areas, I think that the transition will be much more efficient and fair, and also support, as Mauro said, the competitiveness of Europe in a more global perspective. So a couple of additional points also, maybe for Mauro to reflect upon. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Johan. And of course, policy is much, as you say, much more complex because what also Mauro mentioned in the beginning, there is the social aspects, there is the industrial aspect, there is the competition aspect, there are global aspects, and all these have to be balanced in a way that, of course, is much more complex than just kind of going in one direction. Mauro, I will let you comment on what Johan and Nina have said.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I totally agree with Nina. As I said earlier, Europe, climate neutral Europe isn't going to impress anybody, let alone, climate neutral individual member state. When I was talking about the working model, it's not just leading by example, is showing that the climate transformation isn't, there is this new problem, we have a new source of expenditure and the rich countries can do it and the rest of the world can't, because they have more pressing problems. It is understanding that this is a different way to pursue and achieve all the objectives that we want to achieve for our societies. and most likely a better way, because the alternative is climate change causing havoc with all attempts at development, at economic growth, at equality, at job creation. And this is dawning on more and more people. This is happening. Do they have the instruments? If we look at our debate, look at how horribly complicated our debate is, translate that into China. And China is having this debate. But there are three Chinas. There is a China which is a fully developed country, the smaller part. There's a China which is a fast developing country, and there is half a billion Chinese living in poverty. You put that debate in that context, they need to see that somebody is capable of actually getting it right. That is the value of what Europe is doing in general, not only for ourselves, but to stop climate change, we have to show that you can be climate neutral and successful. So climate neutral, because we can afford to pay for the damage, is not good enough. It's not going to convince anybody. Climate neutral, because we can make success out of it, is what's going to change the rest of the world, and it's beginning to happen. Carbon markets, we spent 15 years struggling to make our system successful. It's now being copied, including by China, and thanks to massive technical support we gave them. It will take them a while before it works as well as ours, but hopefully they learn from our mistake. So totally agree with Nina, it has to be done, but for me, it will not happen until we show that we can be successful. And we've started, and that's why over the past 12 months, you've had the beginning of what Antonio Guterres has called a net zero coalition. They've all popped up over the past year. 3 years ago, when we proposed net zero in Katowice, people were looking at us with a mix of admiration and concern and said, these people are bold, subtext, these people are mad. Now, Japan, the United States, Canada, Korea, South Africa, Colombia, Chile, you name them, you have people in all sorts of situations. China 26, which is by Chinese standards isn't bad. Now, we are now moving to demonstrate how do you do it in practice. And I'm sure that we will see others following. Totally agree with Johan about, he's put the finger on a couple of the sore spots. I think we can all play the game, and I'm sure we have all our list of sore spots. And I'm not saying these are less important issues, but I'm saying we can afford to worry about these issues because we are getting the framework right. Without the framework that we are creating, this issue will be irrelevant. Why would you worry about bioenergy if you didn't have a solid policy on renewables and if you didn't have a solid policy on the carbon sink? It's when you have those two policies that you say, will bioenergy interfere with them? Will it help or will it damage? This has to be part of the debate, but it shows how sophisticated our debate has become. And we wouldn't be here if we hadn't had the energy union. The energy union is what solved the possible conflict, which is real, between energy security and clean energy. And a lot of people in the world are still asking themselves, will clean energy improve or damage my energy security? We are no longer asking ourselves that question except at the margins. We're asking bioenergy, we're asking nuclear, but essentially we're no longer asking ourselves whether coal is essential. We're asking ourselves how fast we can get rid of it. Even those who are not putting dates on it have that in mind. We need to solve those aspects and at the same time show the rest of the world that they can do it as well. So I think the fact that we're also having a lively debate on where the problems is one of our strengths. We're managing to harness our disagreements into an honest debate on, okay, we disagree, what do we do next? How do we fix it? Not easy. It's every discussion gets more and more heated. but it only goes to show how important it is.
Thank you very much to all three of you, because our time is now running out or has run out. I think we have concluded in this that we do have a framework, an EU framework that is extremely important also for the Swedish context and for giving industry kind of certainty on how to move forward, which creates the opportunities to actually that we can be successful in the transformation. Of course, also then taking into consideration the social aspects and many other aspects that we haven't really been able to go into depth today. But next year we meet in sunny and beautiful medieval Visby and Gotland, and then we go further into these issues, I hope, and I hope to see you all there. And but by this I conclude, and I wish you a very nice summer, and as I said, hope to see you next year in Almedalen. Thank you very much.